Welcome back. I'm with the SAFTU General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi, Center for Development and Enterprise Director Anne Bernstein, Free Market Foundation Director Leon Lowe, and political economist Professor Patrick Bond. Let me turn to my right and ask you, Leon Lowe, that we're talking government having to stimulate the economy. But generally speaking, it is the function of the business sector and other role players there. How do you rate the way the different stakeholders in South Africa's economy are dealing with the challenge facing the country? That's one part. Second part of the question is, this is not a new problem. One could have said it a long time ago that we're going to end up right here. I've had the talk of own goals being scored I don't know how many times over the past few years. So, who should do what and when?
You know, when they babble on endlessly about stimulating the economy, I wonder if they're planning a massage parlor or an economy. What we should do is stop stifling the economy. What has happened is that we started in 1994 having declined in the World Index of Economic Systems from freer to less free, from about 40 to about 120. We then went up to about 35, 40, in other words, becoming one of the world's freest economies. We grew in the first decade. Now we're right back down to 100 or so. In other words, we've become less free. Now what that means in simple language is the private sector, by which I include informal traders, peasant farmers, backyard operators and the biggest companies, they have been smothered under a tsunami of red tape, regulations and taxes. Just to give you one simple taste, about 16,000 financial services providers were deregistered by the Financial Services Board. Not one big bank or insurer was. What color do you think those financial service providers were? What color and race do you think their customers were? And the Financial Services Board has the temerity to boast to Parliament how many emerging business people it threw out of business. We now have the so-called Twin Peaks thing, will be even worse. So what we're seeing is a smothering of people. Now, I'm about to bring, with, it might surprise people, the political party that's going to be my colleague in this, we, the Free Market Foundation. I can't mention them yet because I don't have their permission, but everyone will be startled. A constitutional case against the Ekurhuleni Council for preventing people living in a shanty town, Marathon and Delport, from uplifting their own living standards. They may not convert their tin shack into a brick building. They may not put in their own plumbing. They may not put in their own paving. They are oppressed in the most obnoxious and extreme way by our old apartheid town planning laws, zoning laws, safety laws, building codes, etc., etc. What we need to do is stop smothering people. We don't need to stimulate people. We just have to stop putting our foot on their throat. What the government's policy is like is this. Imagine a mother sitting with a baby on her knee. She's got a bottle feeding the baby with one hand, and the other hand she's throttling the baby and squeezing its throat. So we try to stimulate and throttle all at the same time. That's not how to treat a baby.
What? Professor Bond?
Well,
looking at the role of the different stakeholders.
Yeah, no, I think Leon's great with these metaphors, but there's a better way to understand the deregistration of machinistas. Those of us in debt, I think it's all of us, have been really wrecked by excessive interest rates. And machinistas, and I'm hoping not just the 100 and some, but also some of the big banks that do much the same through excessive fees and interest charges. But particularly because we know from the Competition Commission that those big banks are also ripping us off. They do currency manipulation. I think those would be the things, if a stimulus is going to work, it would be to make sure money gets to the base. The credit system with these extremely high interest rates, we're paying fourth highest in the world of the countries that issue 10-year bonds in the world markets. And if you want to lower the interest rates, that would be stimulus. Look, if you do that, though, you have to put on exchange controls. Sorry, a little throttling of your WMC, Western multinational corporate friends, so that the money stays in the country and floats around instead of being whisked abroad through illicit financial flows. So exchange controls is a first measure. Then you've got the space to lower the interest rate. Those of us in debt, I think, will all appreciate that as a way to stimulate our recovery.
Well, there are other symbolic things that the president probably could have done, you know, whatever stimulus package we're talking about and whether it will happen or not happen. He didn't say anything about the government, the size of the cabinet or the public sector itself which, there was talk of retrenchments within the public sector. Then he looked over his shoulder and had you, Mr. Vavi, and your colleagues at COSATU and elsewhere say, you don't touch our jobs. Well, what should he do symbolically in that space?
I have come to believe, Tim, that one of now structural deficiencies of this economy is the state of efficiency or just not knowing whether it's now day or night in the government. The government has now become a structural deficiency to further growth in the economy. A government, for example, I was just making a point just recently, a government that can't find out who's touching trains for months. That government have collapsed, doesn't have capacity anymore. A government with 68 cabinet ministers, 5 economic ministers to drive whatever program. And the left doesn't know what is the right doing, often in competition with one another. The small business people who want to open businesses don't even know who should service them. That government is inefficient, and one day I hope that we will have a leader who will say the first thing that we must do in this country is to build an efficient, capable state that can lead all forces of society into a particular direction. And the president didn't deal with that. And you understand why he can't confront that elephant in the room. It touches what he inherited from the Zuma administration, the enlarged cabinet ministers, which was basically a network of patronage system that existed. He touches that. He is facing an NGC threat. We will call an NGC and we will have you recall.
Well, and I suppose, a South African without a job or whoever is running a South African running a business that's struggling and cannot access capital, he looks at all of this and says, but who cares about the economy, the well-being of the ordinary South African? If, as important as they are political considerations, if they supersede...
Look at the crime statistics, Tim.
Yeah.
We are told 57 people die in this country violently.
Every day.
Every day. One day. And the police goes to parliament and say, we only arrest about 40% at any given moment of people committing crime. They go further, they say, we only have about 14-15% conviction rate. For women, sexual offenses, we have about 9, 10, 11. That state doesn't function. In my view, it has collapsed.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the crux of the issue. You need, even my ideological opponent will agree with me that in any development country, a state must drive that development.
Interestingly, in South Africa, how many people are in the security industry are employed there? 2 million or thereabouts?
It's increasing.
There's growth, at least.
Fastest growing because we are insecure, because we're scared, because we've become prisoners.
I want to hear your views on this efficiency matter.
So let me make a few points. The first is South Africa does need an honest and effective smart state. We need them to do the basics. They need to protect all of us from crime, and they need to put some people in jail when they're corrupt. It would be very nice if we could get a few people, you can name who you want, in orange overalls in our jails. So that's really important, and we need a state that does that. I think it should be the state is bloated and overpaid, and we're going to have to deal with that. On the other hand, I think what the president was signaling, and it's only a signal, which if it materializes, I would support. He was signaling that certainly with respect to infrastructure and this big infrastructure fund over the next 5 years, he was saying, because we've heard this story before, but what he said that was different, we will need the expertise of the private sector and to implement as well as to leverage this money to get additional money. I think that's very positive, and we should welcome that if it materializes. The problem is we're caught at the moment. We have a president who I think wants to be a reformer, and he's caught between two parallel universes. The world I would call ANC populism, which is full of fiscal incontinence, fee-free tertiary education, an uncosted national health sort of plan and initiative, which I'm not opposed to improving national health for everyone, but you have to have a serious plan that makes sense. And then, of course, the issue we haven't raised, which the stimulus package didn't deal with, which is we're not going to have any stimulus unless we sort out property rights. So I'm in favor of accelerating land reform. And this has been very badly implemented by the government, but it has absolutely nothing to do with constitutional impediments. It has to do with a very weak state that has been corrupt and that has handled this very, very badly.
We will continue the conversation. We are discussing the South African economy. It's in recession. We are all concerned, but we should be concerned beyond the recession because the unemployment rate has been high for a very, very long time. And of course, the question of land reform, for instance. And there's a point I want to raise about land reform, which involves small farmers who one moment are given farms, next moment those farms get taken away. I'm sure they're very, very confused. Please note one thing. The discussion around the economy is not just for policymakers or panelists such as I'm having here. It should be your concern as well. So we'd like to hear your views, your thoughts, and share those with us on social media, #The Modise Network. Our conversation will continue in a moment.